Hi, I'm Debbie and welcome to Book and Buja, where I talk about all things books, bullet journals, and stationery. Today I'm going through my April wrap-up. Thank you so much for joining me today, and in case you just want to hear the stats, I do chapter all of my videos, and if you just want to hear about certain books, you can always jump back and forth between the stats and what books I read and my thoughts on them if you like. But for those of you who like the stats, those are up next, so stay tuned. If you like the books, feel free to jump ahead a little bit. So I'm so excited. I got my handy dandy reading journal here, of course, but my bookshelves are filling up nicely, and I did color code by month. So the purple's from January, the green is February, and then March was yellow. April is pink, and the orange there is the books I've already started reading in May. But you're here for April. So let's see how I did. So I'm happy to say I had 0 1-star books, which is great. I did have 1 2-star book. I had 10 3-star books. I had 22 4-star books, and I had 3 5-star books with an average rating of 3.75. So I did have a total of 36 books that I read in April, which came to 9,386 pages, which is amazing. I have read more. I think I've read almost 11,000 in 1 month, but that was a couple years ago. And then 149 hours of audiobook listened to. So that was actually down for my audiobook listening. So I actually read more physically and on ebook than I did with listening to audio, which usually I listen to more audiobooks. Okay, so next up is demographics. I read 3 children's books and 1 middle grade. I read 5 young adult and 3 new adult books, and then I read 24 adult. So for format, I read 7 short stories and 4 novellas, 3 graphic novels, 20 standard novels, and 1 poem. Okay, I started 7 series. I continued 10 series, and I completed 1. So I was very glad that I got 1 more series completed. All right, for genres, I'm going to have to go off my cheat sheet here because there's quite a few, which is great. So I read 1 historical book and 4 nonfictions, 2 romance and 6 classics, 16 fantasy and 1 literary fiction, 1 poetry, 2 sci-fi, 1 horror, and 1 adventure book. For sources, I did read 11 books from my library, so that includes physical books from my library and audiobooks from Hoopla, as well as Libby. I borrowed 15 and I owned 10 of those books, so that was great for reading down my owned TBR, which is great. At some point I'll have to do a video of all of my unread books. I think for the most part, can't remember which shelf, I think this shelf, and it's like this half of the shelf is what I haven't read physically for the most part of all of my owned TBR. There might be a couple still up here for my nonfictions, but otherwise I've read all of these and all of these and all of these down here. These are all cookbooks up top here. And I think it's mainly these ones I haven't read. I've read all of these and all of these as well, and then down below are just past journals. So next up is book type. So I listened to 15 audiobooks, I read 11 ebooks, I read 3 physical books, and then 7 mixed media. So that was either an ebook and an audiobook or a physical book and an audiobook. All right, for publication dates, again, I'm gonna have to go off my cheat sheet here. So I read books from 1595 all the way to 2023. So the 1595 and 1601, those were both Shakespeare. 1843, 1845, 1892, so a whole bunch in the 1800s, 1963, 1989, 1993, and then we're into the 2000s. All of those were just 1 book each that I read. So I did read 2 books from 2004. I have another single book from 2006, 2008, and 2012, 2 from 2014, 2015, 2 more from 2016, 2018, 2 from 2019, 2020, and then I actually read 4 from 2021, 3 from 2022, and 4 from 2023. So I've actually been doing quite a big bulk of recent books, which usually I read a lot of past books or series that are already finished being written. My favorite book for April was actually Convenience Store Woman, which I have no idea why I love that book so much, but I just love that book. It just spoke to me, I guess. and it was amazing. I loved it. It was great. And my highest rated book is Words of Radiance by Brandon Sanderson. Best character for the month. I'm gonna say probably Perrin from Wheel of Time in the Dragon Reborn book. Second up would probably end up being Fatma from A Master of Djinn. Standout author, new to me. I mean, I feel like it's kind of cheating because I already used the book once on my favorite list, but Sayaka Murata, she just has such a easy, everyday speaking tone to her writing, which I appreciated and I thought was great. And then my standout author from someone I've read before is Ryan Cahill. I just love his writing and I really enjoyed The Exile. Alright, so book number 1 was TBR Jar, Read Inkheart by Cornelia Funk, which is the first book in the Ink World series. So on the surface, this book was really fun and enjoyable. I had watched the movie and I really enjoyed the movie. Although they definitely had Maggie as older in the movie than she was in the book. I think in the book she was, I want to say she was closer to 10, 12, somewhere in there, 12 or 13, somewhere in there. Where I feel like in the book she was more like 15, 16, 17, somewhere in there. Did I say that backwards? In the book she was around 12-ish. In the movie she seemed around 16-ish. So I would definitely recommend this book to more middle grade readers, like upper middle grade or lower YA readers. I feel like the writing style is geared more towards middle grade readers, but the content is a little bit more YA. I think this would also be a fun book for parents to read with their kids. We follow Maggie as she is learning about and having to figure out how to harness this magic that has brought some interesting experiences into her life. And again, I felt like the concept was really good with this book, but I didn't connect with the characters as much as I thought I would. I'm not quite sure why they were good, but there wasn't that something that really drew me to them or connected me to them, with one exception. And Eleanor, oh my gosh, she was a hoot. She was my favorite character in the book. She was hilarious. She definitely made the reading experience much more enjoyable. I do feel like the plot in the book could have been solidified a bit more. I felt like it was kind of a moving target. There was an overall plot, but getting there was kind of a wandering river, going with the flow and eventually coming back to the destination. The beginning, start of the river, and the ending of the river was great. The meandering in between could have been shortened up, I think. Could have been that much shorter of a book, and I think it would have been a little bit more concise, and the plot would have solidified a little bit more. Overall, I feel like the pacing was a bit slow, especially in the middle. I don't think I will continue with the series. Next was an odd roll, and that was a reread, and for that I read The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe. So The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe is a gothic horror poem or short story, if you prefer to categorize it that direction. I did put it in my stats as a short story as opposed to a poem because it is a little bit longer. It's a beautifully written prose about lost love that is full of emotion and bearing the soul of the writer. So I feel like The Raven was a look into Edgar Allan Poe himself. Next up was an odd, and that was to read a romance, and for that I read The Bennet Women by Eden Apaya Kupi. So The Bennet Women by Eden Apaya Kupi is a retelling of Pride and Prejudice. So we follow three best friends that are all living in the Bennet house, which is a dorm for the college they are all attending. And the first one we follow is EJ, and she is an RA for the Bennet house. She is an engineering student that has big plans for success in the real world. And then we follow her best friend Jamie, who is a trans woman who has recently come out, and Tessa, who is an astronomy major who is also one of the RAs at Bennet House. So these friends together go through the stresses and struggles of school life, love, and surprises in life in general, all while having each other's backs and not being afraid to ask for help and not being afraid to receive the help from their friends. So I feel like the diversity representation in this book is done really well. So we have the transgender representation. We also have ethnicity representation, which is great. We have the male and female dynamic. We have parent and child conflicts. And I also feel like the social commentary in the book hits some really tough topics and makes this book a must read. I think it does a really good job with a lot of things. So this book had me laughing out loud at times. It had me hurting with the characters. It had me feeling inspired by their friendships as well as for their drive in life. And I think the bond of friendship is where this book really shines. It was inspiring. I feel like the writing style was really easy to read and the plot was very enjoyable, and I highly recommend it. So the next book on my TBR was a booktuber rec, and that was A Master of Djinn, the first book in the Dead Djinn universe by P. Djeli Clark. So this is my first book by P. Djeli Clark, and it sounds like there's actually 3 novellas that come before this book. You don't need to read those to go into this one. I hear that they are very good, and so I have added them to my future TBRs, and hopefully I will get to them soon. So this is my first book by P. Djeli Clark, and I was not disappointed. I loved this book. This was one of my 5-star reads for the month. So our main character is Fatma, and she is the youngest woman in the Ministry of Alchemy, Enchantments, and Supernaturals. I think that's the whole title. It's a mouthful. But we follow her as she is assigned to a case of murders of a secret brotherhood that has some high-profile people in it. And she is also assigned at the same time a rookie to work alongside her. Now, she typically works alone, so she's not happy with this. But it is another woman that actually requested her, so you'll have to read the book to see how that relationship goes. So the murderer claims to be Al-Jahiz, who has returned to free the people from social oppression, basically if they ask for it or not. I was intrigued and consistently engaged from the start to the finish. There's always something that was piquing my interest in every chapter, which was great. The pacing, I feel, was just right, and the world building was immersive. Now, I'm someone who loves, like, all growing up, especially junior high, I loved Egypt and everything about it, and it was just always very intriguing. So I'm sure that's probably one reason why this book hit me a little bit more than some others. But there's a mystery to it. It's also a fantasy book, but it has some sci-fi aspects to it, as well as some steampunk, which is great because I love steampunk as well, and I don't read nearly enough books that have steampunk to them. Oh, and the banter between Fatma and the rookie that is assigned to her is great. I love it. The side characters, I think, were written well. There are a couple that kind of stood out. So in the beginning, you're like, okay, side character. But and then in the middle, you're like, oh, this side character's back again. Okay, interesting. Now they're a little more interesting. And then by the end, it was one of my favorite characters. Love them. So I feel like the interactions between the side characters and Fatma helped us to get to know her a little bit better, as well as the world around them and what was going on and how we're kind of wanting to feel about that world. And the epilogue. I don't want to give anything away, but that epilogue was priceless. I don't know why it hit me so much, but I loved it. I thought it was great. All right, and then then it was an even standalone, Love on the Brain by Allie Hazelwood, and I actually ended up reading that at the end of March, so you can check out my March wrap-up, and I will leave that linked up in the cards above to check out my thoughts on that one. And then The Hidden Oracle, so that was for an even card, and that was to read a book in the Trials of Apollo series, and that's by Rick Riordan, and this is the first book in the Trials of Apollo. So The Hidden Oracles did not disappoint. It still brought all of the funness of the Percy Jackson universe into this book. Basically, Apollo angers his father Zeus a little too many times, yet again. And so Zeus sends him down to Earth to be a human and to learn his lesson. Unfortunately, Apollo has a lot of enemies. So now he has to figure out how he's going to survive being human and not having any of his godly powers. and who can he trust, and he needs to find some friends to help him out to survive, as well as to learn what he needs to learn. He realizes he needs to get to Camp Half-Blood, and he's already in New York. Who else is in New York? Well, he needs to find his good friend, Percy Jackson, to help him get to Camp Half-Blood. To me, this book was like coming home after vacation and getting to sleep on your own pillow again. Just, it was so cozy and fun and lighthearted and sarcastic and all of that stuff that I love from Rick Riordan's writing. So this book had me laughing out loud, and I loved the new characters, and I loved the characters we already know and love. And I think one of my favorite things is when Apollo does get to Camp Half-Blood, and where is he going to go? But he gets to stay in camp in the Apollo cabin, so he gets to interact with all of his kids, which is super fun. I can't wait to get into the second book. So next up, I read Where the Wild Things Are by Maurice Sendak. And this one is another reread. It was actually for the prompt adaptation. And I did notice that it was adapted into a movie or a TV series or something like that. Again, the artwork is just stunning. I think the plot, I guess you could say, of the book is a little questionable. A child gets sent to his room for being bad, and his imagination takes over. He has a ton of fun while he's in the room, and then the mom relents and lets him out without him learning his lesson. So basically he just got sent to his room to have fun. And I think it was a lot of fun, and the artwork is stunning. All right, so next up was a YouTube pick, and that was Pyramids, which is the 7th book in the Discworld series by Terry Pratchett. Who knew quantum irregularities could be so interesting and entertaining? But in Pyramids, they are. And that camel, that was probably the best character in the book. So much fun. So Tebek, following in his uncle's footsteps, is training to be an assassin, but he is the king's son, so he does have other duties that he's supposed to be doing, but he does choose to train as an assassin instead. But something unexpected happens, and he has to return home to take over his princely duties earlier than he thought he would. So this book is clever, witty, and what a fun ride on the camel. So riding on the back of a camel in the desert, taking on some ancient pyramids. What's not to like? Terry Pratchett keep things light and fun as usual, and I think the science was great. I don't know how accurate any of it was, but it was fun. Next up was Midnight Tides, which is the 5th book in the Malazan Book of the Fallen series by Stephen Erickson, and that was for the prompt to read an audiobook. So I'm not sure how it's possible, but I feel like Stephen Erickson upped his game even more in this book. I really enjoyed this book. I think this is one of my favorites at this point. We do jump to another continent in this book with almost all new characters yet again. Keeping it consistent, right? But man, this book delivered. The atmosphere, the world building, the writing, and especially the characters were so well done. So we're getting an omnipotent perspective of 2 main families that are in these 2 local communities. One is a Lethriel and the other is a Tist-Idur. And I love seeing the different brotherly relationships in the 2 different families, how they interact with each other, how they relate to each other. So my new favorite characters for the series are Tehal and Bug. Bug is chef's kiss, a great character. I love Bug. Their interactions and the banter between the 2 of them are on point. As a character-driven reader, I really appreciated their characters as well as the character development within all of the characters throughout Midnight Tides. And yes, there are more new characters to get to know, but he really builds these characters in this book, and you actually really get to know all of them, the side characters, the main characters, all of them. And I feel like there was really only one returning character to this book from previous books, but I could be wrong on that. Yeah, this book was so engaging. I had no trouble flying through this 900 plus page book. I think I read it in about a week, and it was that good. Huge page turner. Next was to read a sci-fi book, and that was Divergence by E.B. Wolf. And this is Into the Machine Part 1. This is a sci-fi dystopian where humanity is living in technological utopias that are placed around the world. There are also those that live on the fringe of the utopia who either choose not to live in there or for some reason have found themselves outside of the utopias when they were created. And these people living on the fringe are all waiting on a hero that will come and save them. So this book did start out fairly slow, but by chapter 4, that's about where it started picking up. So I think by the end of at the beginning of chapter 3, I was like, oh, do I even want to put myself through this? It's so slow. I'm not really interested. I'm not engaged. I have so many other books I want to read this month. But it's short, 120 something pages, or it's definitely under 150 pages. And I'm like, let's just push through and get through it, and maybe it'll pick up. And by chapter 4, it definitely picked up. So the pace picked up, the intrigue you started getting more of a plot, you started getting to know some characters, and it started getting a lot more interesting. So if you decide to read this book, just push through the first 3 chapters, and then by chapter 4, it's good. And then it keeps that pace and that interest up through the rest of the book. All right, so next I had to read a nonfiction, and for that I read Burnout, which was also the J&R Book Club book pick. That is by Emily and Amelia Nagoski. Now this one I have mixed feelings about. So the first third of the book I think was really good. There's a lot of really good information. And then the last third of the book was really good. It kind of picked back up to where it started. Some of the strengths in this book is at the end there's like the TLDR, too long don't read, summary. So there's a few bullet points at the end of each chapter that kind of summarized what they talked about. So I thought that was great. If you kind of wanted to skip around or just get some highlights to begin with and then kind of get in there and dig into the information a little bit more, you could. And I did appreciate that a lot, and they were very helpful. But then there was this weird kind of chunk in the middle that just kind of lost me. It was very strange. It took on kind of a biased point of view, so I felt like for a book that's helping you to figure out how to get through burnout and stress and how to deal with it, it started getting more into feminism, which is fine, but it didn't quite fit with the topic of the book, and it got a little cringy. I almost felt like someone who has body shame issues, especially if you're a smaller person. I feel like this was not negative towards you, but sort of. I traveled for a couple years and I would stay with host families, and I stayed with a lady. It was me and one of my friends, and she was a larger lady, and the host mom basically said that I'm not a real woman because I was thin. So she basically spent all her time talking to my friend that was larger, and I felt like I was shunned, and that's kind of how this one chapter made me feel. I don't think that's what they were intending, but that's how it came across. So part of that could just be from my past experience. The other thing that was cringy and just kind of weird, like the first couple times it was like, haha, yeah, okay. But every time they used the word patriarch, in parentheses it would say ugh. And so the first couple times, cute, yeah, get it. But every single time for the rest of the book, I think there was only 2 instances where it said patriarch and didn't have ugh after it. That it got old. I'm like, after the first 2 times, it's fine. Like, either find a different word or just stop. We get it. You don't have to keep saying ugh after every time. And so if you were listening to the audiobook, luckily I had the physical book, so I think it was actually went a little better. But I knew some people that were listening to the audiobook, and one of them just was like, okay, I'm done, and she DNF'd because she was just so annoyed with that. So take that as you will. So it did feel a little weird to me that they put like all of the meat of the book at the beginning with the little side dishes at the end, and then the middle was just weird. I don't know. I felt the flow got lost. The plot kind of got lost. The plot as in like we're trying to learn about burnout and how to deal with that. It just kind of went into this weird limbo in the middle, but then it did wrap up nicely. And again, the TLDRs at the end of each chapter, the little summaries, were great. And so maybe just if you get to a point where you're like, this book is getting weird, just read the little summaries and then move on to the next chapter. I am glad I read it. I did get some really good tips, especially the first 4 chapters, and the last couple were great. And so I think it is worth a read. Just know that there's some spots in the middle that are going to be kind of meh. So great information, so-so execution. So next up was an Inkheart, Nature on the Cover. And for that I read I Can Do It by Louise Hay. And I thought this book was great. So Louise Hay is helping you to change the way you think. So how to take a negative thought and turn it into a positive one. So positive affirmations and positive thinking, and how to basically trying to create a habit of positive thinking throughout your life and not letting that negative thought take hold and bring you down for the day. I do like that there's examples at the end of different affirmations and how you can incorporate those into your life. I thought that was great. So next up is a friend pick, and for that I read The London Seance Society by Sarah Penner. Now I do have to say I think I liked The Lost Apothecary a little bit more, but I still really enjoyed The London Seance Society, and I still gave it 4 stars. It was great. So The London Seance Society is paranormal historical fiction that is based in the 1800s, and we are following 2 women that are looking for truth and justice in the art of seance. So when someone passes away, they get everyone together that was close to this person, and they would do a seance to try and figure out either if they were murdered, like what happened when they died, if they have any closure that they need to do. They use the seances for that. So we follow Lena Wicks as she is looking for answers to her sister's death, while also trying to open her logical mind to the idea of seances being a real thing. Her sister believed in them, but Lena is much more logical and wants to see the facts behind it before she'll believe. So Lena meets up with her sister's mentor, Readalong, and together they start looking into Lena's sister's death. This leads them to the London Seance Society, which is a male-only seance club. I really loved the historical aspect of it and the atmosphere of the 1800s. I love that time period, especially in books and movies. I feel like the characters overall are well done. We could have gotten a little bit more about them throughout the book, but overall you get the gist of who they are and they're believable. The plot I think was fairly well developed and progressed well. I do think that the end of the book was a lot more fast-paced than the rest of the book, and I think some of the stuff in the middle could have been left out to make more time for the things at the end to unfold. I also feel that a book with seance in the title, there was definitely a lack of seances in the book. They talked about seances a lot and the art of it, but you didn't really see a lot of seances until the end, and then it went by super quick and you were trying to figure out what was going on, and it was a little too fast-paced, I think, at the end. Although the seance in the end was definitely very well written and great, and it added everything to the plot. I do recommend this book for anyone who loves historical fiction as well as paranormal aspects and kind of that gothic time period. Alright, we've got 2 more from my TBR. I ended up with 15 books, so we've got 2 more left, almost done. So The Red Scrolls of Magic by Cassandra Clare, which is the first book in the Eldest Curses series, and that was for a booktuber rec. And this one was for the Shadowhunter read-along as well. This one we follow Magnus and Alec as they're on vacation and doing a European tour. It was fun. So we have Magnus trying to make things all romantic for the 2 of them. You have Alec that's trying to keep Magnus safe and looking for danger and things around them that might happen. Oh, and then there's talk about the Crimson Hand. So apparently Magnus and Ragnar Fell were out drinking one night and decided to come up with the Crimson Hand, which was a cult that they decided to create one night while they were drinking a little too much. And suddenly it seems like someone is taking it seriously and making it a real thing. I love that we have a lot of familiar characters. We have some new characters. The sarcasm and sass that we always see from Magnus, I love it. I'm here for it. And all the heart feels. Oh, I love Magnus and Alec. So precious. I also like getting some more backstory on some characters that we already know and love. For the Shadowhunter read-along, though, we read this after we read the Dark Artifices series, which I feel like this book, everything that happens in this book happens before that series. So if you're going to read through the whole Shadowhunter universe, I would recommend reading the Red Scrolls of Magic or the Eldest Curses series, at least this book, before the Dark Artifices. I think it fits better and you'd remember some things from earlier better if you read it then than reading it afterwards. All right, last one that was on my TBR is Quiet Thunder by J.P. Harker, and that was for a book you keep putting off. So I did start this book back in November, and then I had just way too many books on my TBR that month. And then December, I had some really long books. It was the holidays, and I just got bogged down by other things in life going on. But I finally got back to it, and I'm so glad I did. So I was taking my time, especially back in November. I was taking my time, reading it really slowly. I was trying to take notes on every chapter, every character, everything in the world. And I was like, that's just taking too long. I just want to read this book, so let's just read it. And I'm so glad I finally got to it. I am going to have a full review coming out for this video because this book was kindly given to me by the author, J.P. Harker, and it was amazing. So he does not hold his punches with his characters. No character's safe. Anything can happen to anybody, and I love that. One of the things I enjoyed most about this book is you start off with a prologue, and it is more from the antagonist or the villain's point of view, and I love that. I love getting both sides of the story. It was great. So I was sucked in right away. All I read was the prologue. I was like, yes, I would love to read this book and review it. Just a basic, quick little review for it. If you want my full review, again, check out the video that I will be posting soon. We are following basically two different tribes. So we have the Katuvan tribe that has been occupied by the Gaians for generations now. And during this time, they have transitioned from more of like a warrior clan to more farming and merchant clan. And then we have the Syrian tribe, who has also been under Gaian rule, that has taken it upon themselves to continue to be warriors, and they now want to liberate everybody else from Gaian rule, whether they asked for it or whether they want to be liberated or not. The main Katavan character that we follow is Carrion, and she is basically a steward on her family's ranch. And as the Syrians go through the area and they reach her family's ranch, her life will never be the same. This is a beautiful, though a bit bloody, coming-of-age story. For the rest of the books that I read in April, because there definitely wasn't 36 that I just went over, it was just 15. If you want to know more about all the rest of the books I read in April, make sure you check out my April Readathon wrap-up video, and that I will leave linked in the cards and in the description box below. And then for my book club books, we already talked about Burnout, which is for the J&R Book Club. For the Full Moon Book Club, we read the London Seance Society. And for the Howling Pack Book Club, that was a Master of Djinn. For my read-alongs, I did read the Red Scrolls of Magic for the Shadowhunter read-along. For the Malazan read-along, I read the Midnight Tides. For the Cosmere one, I read it actually last month, and that was Words of Radiance. And for the Discworld read-along around the Disc in 800, I did read Pyramids and Guards. Guards was cute. I think that's one of my favorite books so far in this series. Pyramids and Guards are both really good. Oh, and for the Ketchup Book Club, that was the last one. The Ketchup Book Club, I did read Before They Were Hanged, and I read that in March. So thank you so much for joining me today and going through my April wrap-up, and I can't wait to see you again in my next video. So please like, comment, and subscribe. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss any videos from me, and until next time, bye!